Today, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, episode 62 of Politically Conscious takes place as we ask our political experts, historically, who's actually been better for the economy, Republicans or Democrats? Don't miss this breakdown, as we also break down the facts behind the SAVE Act as it clears the House, reflect on the legacy of civil rights icon Jesse Jackson, and ask why the FCC moved to block Stephen Colbert's interview with James Talarico. No spin, no sacred cows, just receipts. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. We're going beyond Black History Month and getting to the money at the Mental Dialogue Live experience, as we've dubbed February as Black Business and Financial Strategy Month. Legacy isn't luck, it's strategy, and business grows through connection. Learn wealth strategies from financial coach Ashonda Davis and wealth educator Denise Muldrew. Business owners come out and learn how to get connected and more exposure with insight from Melvin Coleman, president of the Atlanta Black Chamber, and finally discover why every family with young children should have Monopoly game nights. Friday, February 20th, 7 p.m. at Urban Grind. Get all details at mentaldialogue.com. If we bring smart and good people together, smart and good things happen.
You're on mute, brother. Okay, so welcome to Mental Dialogue. You have the three of us coming back as we always do. While Montoya gets himself together on the mic, I got Leo Smith, I got myself, and Montoya is our moderator. Montoya, take it away.
Hey, welcome to episode 62 of Politically Conscious. We got a live one today, so we're gonna get right into these cuts. If you've never listened to us, hey, we're getting a lot of viewers, man. Well, a few weeks ago we had 6,000, 2,000 another week. So hey, we starting to pump this thing up, man. But we are out here basically doing it a little different than the mainstream media, by critiquing the mainstream media, watching the different cuts across the social media when it comes to politics, whether they're actually from national media or even clips that individuals are doing on their IG page talking about what's happening in politics. And so I was excited to do this conversation today, and I wanted to start off a little different than what we normally do, which is just reacting strictly to clips, and start out with the premise of who's better with the economy. Because if you recall, Emil, when we first started this politically conscious, when we first started, we were transitioning right prior to the actual election. For this last sake, for the presidency. And at that time, I kept going, why aren't the Democrats talking about the economy going into this? Why isn't Biden or why isn't Kamala talking about how well they did with the economy? I was so mad because they were playing, they were so into identity politics over the track record. Because as we talked about at the time, inflation was super high, but people had the money. It don't feel like that a year later. So I said, you know what? Let's have this dialogue. Anytime we brought Leo to the show, he's highlighted, hey, man, based on how you look at the numbers, you can make it look however you want. So I'm just going to say, going into this, I've researched this thing left and right. And so I need to figure out between the two of y'all. I got my man Emil on the left and my man Leo on the right. So Emil, give a quick background. Leo, give a quick background. And then I'm going to play a cut that starts this conversation.
Emil Bryant, political consultant, author, speaker, and general rabble rouser. My job is to consult with political candidates who want to tell the truth. My wisdom to them always is the people know best. Give them the information to make good and intelligent decisions. Bad news does not get better with time. Tell the truth, tell it early, tell it often.
Leo, introduce yourself. We're going to play our first cut.
I'm Leo Smith. I'm outside of Atlanta. I am a former Republican National Committee strategist and former GOP exec here in Georgia. I have a company, Engaged Futures Group, which does public affairs, government relations, and business development. I've been doing that for about 16 years in Georgia. And now my focus is always on advocating for policy that uplifts and empowers. And so today's discussion about the economy, what type of economy uplifts, what type of economy empowers, and what type of economy stabilizes is of great interest to me. So I'm looking forward to chopping it up with these brothers.
Sounds good. So I'm going to play this first cut. This one comes from John Hope Bryant. And so it's kind of a little longer cut for everybody that they're watching, but he's got to get everything out, and then I'll let you guys respond to it.
Which presidential party has done better for GDP and economic prosperity and growth over the last 75 years? So here you are. Some of you know, in addition to being an entrepreneur, I've been an advisor to 3 U.S. presidents from both political parties and served both with distinction under Obama and George W. Bush. I've known 9 U.S. presidents, one I don't claim. Here are the facts in a nonpartisan, non-emotional basis. I like math, to quote my friend Melody Hobson, because it doesn't have an opinion. Here's the math. Historically, Democrats have presided over higher average GDP, gross domestic product, the income of the nation, than Republicans. Again, there's no emotions here. This is just the math. Though both parties have seen periods of strong and weak economic performance. Democrats like President Johnson, he's number 1 on the list. I'll go through the list in a minute. President Kennedy and President Clinton, who I love and who I served informally when he was president and formally when he left the office through his foundation as an advisor, oversaw some of the highest growth periods, while Republicans like Reagan and Eisenhower also achieved strong economic growth, giving credit where credit is due. Republican administrations, particularly since Reagan, have often focused on tax cuts and deregulation, leading to short-term boosts, but also higher deficits. Please stay with me here. The former president's tax cuts exploded the budget in deficits, even though they created short-term economic stimulus. Since 1948, about 75 years, data on U.S. economic growth under Democratic and Republican presidents suggests that the economy has generally performed better under Democratic leadership in the presidency compared to Republican leadership. According to bipartisan research, GDP growth, gross domestic product, has averaged around 4.3% under Democratic presidents compared to 2.5% under Republican presidents from 1947 to 2013. So that's not even close, right? Here's the key findings. It goes even further. GDP growth. On average, the U.S. economy has grown faster under Democratic administrations with annual GDP growth averaging 1.8% points higher than their Republican administration counterparts. Number 2, unemployment rates. Unemployment rates have generally fallen under Democratic presidents compared to Republican presidents. Number 3, stock market performance. The stock market has also tended to perform better under Democratic presidents, with the S&P 500 stock market index seeing greater gains during their tenures. Number 4, job creation. Job creation has been stronger under Democratic administrations. However, it is important to note that these differences in economic performance has been attributed to factors outside of just the president's direct control, such as oil shocks, productivity trends, and changes in consumer confidence. And most recently, the deficit, which is under nobody's control, not the deficit, inflation, which was under no one's control after the pandemic, was fueled because we put trillions of dollars in stimulus on a bipartisan basis, by the way, into the economy through the government after the pandemic, or as a result of the pandemic, the worst pandemic since the Spanish flu 125 plus years ago. Never happened in the history of America before. So there was no pandemic manual, how much stimulus you should provide. But by the way, it's amazing that we don't have 12% inflation right now with 30% unemployment rate. It is unbelievable what folks did since the pandemic to stabilize this country. We're now arguing whether it's 3 or 4% unemployment, whether our interest rates are 5 or 6%. It's all high class problems. So Lyndon Johnson was number 1 for economic growth. Number two was Kennedy. 3 was Bill Clinton. I love what he did. Clinton presided over one of the longest peacetime expansions with technology booms, low unemployment, budget surpluses, lower debt levels for the nation by the end of his term. Give credit. Number 4 is Ronald Reagan. Number 5, Dwight Eisenhower. Those are 2 Republicans. And so it goes on and goes on and goes on. As you know, Carter dealt with the oil shock, so his administration didn't do well in that regard. And he was also a Democrat. But overall, Democrats have presided over the longest period of economic growth, unprecedented. And of course, you want to have other parts in Congress too. Peace and light.
So that's John Host Bryant's, from his perspective, a bipartisan approach, looking at all the numbers. As he says, Math doesn't have an opinion. So Leo, we'll start with you. Any thoughts on what John Hope Bryant highlights over the last 75 years? I'm have some other stuff we're going to show later, but I want to see what you think of what he had to say.
Here's the other thing math doesn't do. It doesn't consider external variables unless you put the variable in there. So that was, fascinating. I appreciated that. John Hope is in a good position to speak to these things. But he was being very simplistic in his analysis because he was looking at GDP as a measure of who is better with the economy, which doesn't tell the whole story, because he even mentioned several Democrat leaders, Obama, Biden, Clinton. There's something very, very, Emil, consistent about each one of them. They all came into presidency after a recession. And so, of course, you're going to have more growth post-recession, just like Biden. He came in, COVID, things were shut down, things open back up. You get lots of growth metric. So, Republicans look long-term in how they manage the economy. Democrats are more about stabilizing, and that's generally where they accept office. So I don't think that GDP is, it's helpful. It points a direction. I don't disagree with anything. Yes, Democrats, statistically, from a math, just give me the number, Democrats do better than Republicans. There's no doubt. But you also got to look at, it's just like when I told the Republican Party leadership, look, I can increase your black vote by this much. Well, the fact is the baseline was pretty bad. So I came out looking like a guru, right? But I was dealing with a horrible baseline. So the same thing with the economy. Most of the time when the economy is really struggling, there's been a recession, people call on the Republicans to fix it. And then the Democrats, because the fixing is hard, because the fixing work kind of focuses on growth, long-term, rich people. Rich people don't suffer in recessions, by the way. They buy more stuff. They grab stuff. And then when the poor people get upset about that, they elect a Democrat, and the Democrat does the stabilization plan.
Emil, your thoughts to what John Hope Bryant said. I have my thoughts too, but I'm going to give out an expert. So
I see the same basic trend, but I interpret it a little bit differently than Leo. And this is where my progressive tendencies will shine forth, because a lot of times the reason why we had those recessions is because some of the Republican policies tended toward favoring the wealthy, which put sugar into the economy. Just like you put sugar in a kid's mouth, you're going to get a short-term spike, and then you're going to get a crash. And that's typically what happens, especially since the Reagan era. It's easy to see it when you look at the numbers. Reagan requested from a Democratic Congress, and I'm going to very much include this in the conversation and as we continue, that they give him a lot of money. Reagan inspired a lot of people, Democrats included. So there are these people called Reagan Democrats. That's a real thing. It was a real phenomenon back in the early 80s. And they gave him what he asked for in the budget. And that created deficits, but it also spiked the economy. So it actually tended to be a good thing in the near term. But then at the end of his second term, we saw a recession coming, and George H.W. Bush said the phrase that killed him, "no new taxes," which obviously was not a lie. It was just a bad promise. The problem with the analysis that John Hope Bryant did is that he used words like tended and trend and these different things. And where Leo and I completely agree is that the Republican leadership tends to have a longer term vision focused on, especially since the 80s, trickle down type economics. Give rich people money, they invest it, and then people get jobs later. Democrats tend to go bottom up, give people money at the bottom of the economic ladder, and they tend to spend that money, and that money trickles up. Those two principles tend to clash. They also tend to work when there's a mixed Congress and White House. So there's a lot that John Hope Bryant did that we can unpack, but the problem I saw in his analysis, just like Leo, is that it was pure numbers with no extenuating circumstances included.
We got our brother Kenny, who's always watching. Shout out to Kenny. He says the president gets more credit and blame for the economy than he deserves. Absolutely, that's just the way it is. Let's see, the waiter in the restaurant gets blame or praise for the consumer experience. So absolutely, absolutely right. We've highlighted that again. Yeah, and I'm not even leaning on the president Kenny, just for the sake of this conversation, we're talking about the policies themselves. And so, as you see, we didn't lead with which president per se, even though John Hope was going president by president and how they ranked based on looking at the pure numbers, as he said. Now I got my brother, well, I call him my brother because we play so many clips from him, Joshua Doss. Doss Discourse is his IG page. I'm going to play a couple cuts from him today. But if y'all do recall, he's a data analysis. And so he has some numbers that I did a lot of research myself. He has some numbers that are different than mine. So I'll lean to his numbers, but I will point out some differences that I felt like I found from his numbers. But let me play his cut and get y'all thoughts on it as well. Because I think this conversation goes beyond just the economy per se, based on some things he says at the end.
People of Michigan voted in the guy who just tried to take a sledgehammer to their healthcare coverage and got saved from the consequences of their vote by their Democratic governor, by Democratic politics. So here's your uncomfortable question. How many times and how much longer are we going to keep saving people from the consequences of their vote? How much longer do we expect people to be able to wreak havoc in presidential elections and then hide behind the refuge of Democratic politics? The Republican president, George Bush, gets elected and gets handed an economy from Bill Clinton that's booming. The GDP is at 4%, just created 22 million jobs. The unemployment rate is at a 33-year low. America says, yeah, thanks, Democrats, we got it from here. Hands it to George Bush. He leaves it in a recession. Obama gets handed an economy that's losing 700,000 jobs a month, fixes it up, makes 16 million jobs, cuts the unemployment rate from 8% to 4.8%. America says, yeah, thanks for pulling us out of recession, Obama. Thanks for pulling out of recession, Democrats. We've got it from here. Hands it back to the Republicans. Hands Donald Trump an economy that is on the largest economic expansion in the history of America, 128 consecutive months. Trump leaves it in a recession again. Actually, 10 of the last 11 recessions have all been under Republican presidents. How long do we expect Democratic politics to clean up your mess? Democratic politics killed cigarette usage indoors. Republicans fought tooth and nail against it. Democratic politics created Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Democratic politics created the 40-hour work week, the minimum wage, the VA, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. And Republican politics were on the opposing end of every single one of those things. Aren't we so lucky that they happened to lose? But how much longer does America continue to expect to get saved from the Republican politics it keeps voting for by the Democratic politics that it keeps voting away?
Emil, any thoughts? Any? Again, he's a data analyst. I'm sorry. And so I'll just highlight the one thing that I felt like I saw different, but I looked at this going into the to us doing this show. And I've highlighted on this show. Matter of fact, when Leo was last week, somebody asked, what did Trump do? And I felt like the numbers I saw, our entrepreneurship within our community went from 6% to 13% under Trump, and they went to 15% under Biden. So they continued to go up. Whereas I guess the way he looked at the numbers, that doubling of entrepreneurship in our community was attributed to Biden, and he gave the exact job number. So I would lean towards his thoughts. But I just know I found that's out of all the information, that's the one thing I saw different. But go ahead, Emil.
So I looked at some of the things you were talking about in terms of black entrepreneurship, and there's a couple of things that if you want to nuance it, you can really get some information. The problem with any number is the extenuating circumstances, and so what Josh Doss does, I think. He overlooks the context of all of those policies. And I know exactly why he said what he said, because it makes sense to me that those policies tend to favor people who do not normally have a voice in politics the way that others would through the money that they can spend. So when you see those policies enacted, you have to remember that those policies are also part of a larger scheme that the Democrats have typically tried to push since the New Deal, which is under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which is building enough of a economic infrastructure that people can always afford to eat, or always afford to live, or always afford to move. Those things tend toward being the base of Democratic policies. They want rent to be manageable. They want food to be manageable so people can eat. And the reason why that is because they've recognized over the years that social safety programs are not a panacea. Lyndon LBJ and the war on poverty greatly expanded social safety net policies. The problem was he didn't expand jobs. So it took Nixon, who focused on Black entrepreneurship and Black capitalism as a president, to really begin to emphasize work as part of the overall formula for policy. That's not to say that others didn't think through it, but Nixon was very explicit in terms of Black capitalism. I don't give him credit because there was another political reason why he did that, and that was to blunt the Black Panthers and other people who were gaining popularity in the Black community. However, it did emphasize job growth and wage growth. And that is something that needs to be talked about, because LBJ, in expanding the social safety net, did not focus on jobs and growth the way Nixon did. And Nixon did that in order to fundamentally reframe social safety net from a handout or a way to survive to a Band-Aid while you go between jobs. And that's a significant policy shift that happened in the late 70s or early 70s and late 60s. That together brings us to today, where we still see this competition between jobs and social safety net. And we're never quite able to figure out what the right mix is to give people the boost they need to get back into the workforce in a way that respects their work, gives them a living wage, and ensures business owners can survive and thrive while they pay that living wage.
I would offer them, let Leo jump in, but I'll offer that I think we're stuck in that battle that you just laid out historically. When I say stuck in the battle, I'm talking about, I would offer from a narrative standpoint than an actual what's happening in the economy standpoint. I'm going to show some other numbers here after Leo gives his thoughts to what you said and what Joshua Doss had to say. Go ahead, Leo.
I mean, look, the real issue is, as people deal with their household, we have to realize that there are two different types of households when it comes to paychecks, right? There's the household that gets a paycheck. Their income, their lifestyle, their comfort is all about the paycheck, the employer given paycheck. There's a whole nother group of people out there that paycheck people don't interact with. And those are people who are living off the interest from their investments. They are market oriented. Republicans like market stability and market growth. Democrats like getting a paycheck. And so oftentimes when folks who are hurting and getting their paychecks are happening, they are then therefore losing the ability to maintain and obtain assets like housing, right? And that's when people who have extra money go and swallow everything up. They buy houses that people are foreclosing on, etc. So you got two different realities. One reality is saying this is a great market. The other reality is saying this is a horrible market. That's actually where we are right now. For
Absolutely.
most people, even conservatives who hate Trump, if they're in the market, they love this economy. If you're working for someone, you've got a lot of anxiety and tension right now because nothing's happening right now but innovation and disruption because of innovation. Those people who ride the innovation investment model, the Republicans, future growth, long-term capital gain, that kind of stuff, they're loving this economy. The folks who are like saying, I get jobs because Joe Biden flooded the economy with IRA and IIJA money, the Inflation Reduction Act, and all these people got these big checks. Looked like black people were like finding it was like gold rush for black people. But then Trump came in and took all that stuff away because he felt that that was going to destabilize the markets. So, I agree with pretty much all of the analysis. As a matter of fact, the gentleman we play his clip. He basically said, yes, he reiterated what I said. The Democrats tend to come in at a time of recession and then things pop off and grow. These are just the cycles of the economy. But the real issue is, who do we want? How do we get like both sides to trust? How do we get the super wealthy who are market oriented to trust government at the same time getting, regular middle class people to also trust the government? Rarely do you have a president who's working on both.
So So when we ask the question, who's better? So what happens is, so basically 86% of the country works for someone. Like that's the reality, kind of always will be the reality to a degree. You know, maybe with the technology, we'll get to 20% entrepreneurs out there or whatever. But full-time entrepreneurs is only 11%. Like people that only work for themselves with no assistance, that's only 11%. But part-time entrepreneurs moves that number to about 14%. So Leo, to a degree, yeah, if you're in that 14%, I'm just using my rough numbers as as my own analysis, if you will, then it's great for you. But if you go for the 86%, then let me show these numbers real quick. And the funny thing is, I'm watching two of our main watchers, Kenny and Brother Pianki. They're literally on both sides of it. And as Brother Pianki says, the Trump economy serves me very well. So he's in that group you're talking about, right? So, that's the reality. And so I get, and I always say politics is personal interest. So I respect what Brother Pianki is having to say, right? Now, when I think of it from a economy standpoint for the African-American community, realizing where we are economically, I know that ends up being a lot of us who are benefiting from, for example, these numbers I'm about to show here. I don't think y'all are going to be able to see it well, but I'm going to say some of them to you. This was just another thing I found, again, when I researched these numbers. And like y'all say, the numbers don't give full context. But when I see this consistently, it becomes, in my opinion, hard to say, do we lean into what the 14% are saying, or do we worry about the 86%? Again, that's just me looking at it from a layman. I don't understand politics or numbers to the degree that both of you do. So let me admit that. But when I just look at it from a layman standpoint, I just look at the data and look at the numbers. I'm like, hey, the 86% seem to keep getting left out. Let me pull this up real quick. Hold on one second. And unfortunately, I need to look at the numbers because y'all won't be able to see it, even those out there watching it. But just kind of looking at this. So what you're looking at, even though it's rough to see here, this is just a chart dating how the Republicans and how the Democrats have done over the years and highlighting which administrations were the best at this. So I can read it a little bit. I'm making it big for myself. I don't know if that works for you guys. But just to kind of share this with you. And to me, Leo, if you recall, when we first started the show, going into January of 2024, as me and you both was calling out the Democrats for not highlighting what they had done well, right? They were leaning into, if you remember, we were having that, and again, this is not me being for the Democrats. I hate identity politics from the left and the right. So I despise them. So I came on this show saying, I despise when both sides do it. Why don't they speak to the things that actually matter? But obviously they're using politically what they think will work over the actual numbers. And so I had researched the numbers and I shared them on the show. And I was like, hey, inflation's up, but the economy's doing well. So like, for example, as you heard John Hope Bryant say, some of these are some of the same things, but it talk about, for example, real stock returns. Under Republicans, the average is at 5.2%. Under Democrats, the average is at 12.2%. Inflation rate, higher under Republicans, generally speaking. Real GDP growth, higher under Democrats. Adding job employment, higher under Democrats. Here's the one that this chart that John Hope Bryant didn't talk about. Changes in crime rates. Remember, we've had dialogues on this stuff, right? Changes in crime rate. It's plus 0.7% under Democratic presidents. It's down 3.4% under Democrats. Did I say it right? Did I say it wrong?
Under Republicans.
Under Republicans, it went up.
So it's high. It goes up slightly, just slightly under Republicans. The crime rate, it actually goes down under Democrats. Now, of course, the 93 crime bill, which I hate. Let me call that out personally. But I'm just saying, there's these narratives that have been created that the numbers do not support the narratives. And I always talk about, don't be fooled by political narratives. Like, let me say this, just a couple other things from this chart just to highlight. For example, real GDP growth. You know who was the best at that? Clinton. Guess who was the second best at that? Biden, but y'all have already called it out, so I respect it. Changes in budget deficit. The best administration ever at that was Obama. The second best was Clinton. Let me give Trump some credit here. He was the second best on real stock returns behind Clinton. He was the best on inflation behind guess who? Obama. And at the time, I remember the people were saying we got to get this economy out of Obama's hand. And I was sitting here going, the most millionaires ever made happened in the last 8 years. I don't know if I'm a fan of everything Obama done, but how are we saying the economy's messed up? 128 weeks of growth, the record. So I'm saying the narrative. Y'all jump in. I'm just talking about the narrative actually fools us from what actually happens. And then one other thing I'll say is I looked at polling over these years, and the American economy, the American people think the Republicans do better. So the narrative actually does better than the actual numbers.
So one of the funny things about the Republican Democrat sort of dichotomy and is that the Republicans tend to message better during campaigns, and Democrats tend to govern better after campaigns. And this is a problem that Democrats have had for decades. They will do really good things for the economy, for poverty, for crime, and then terribly fumble the ball when it comes to messaging that to the American people, hence the conversation you just brought up. The other part that I see historically that really is frustrating for me to watch as a modern voter is, how did we get here? We never talk about how these policies and programs impact the bottom line. So you can go to Black unemployment, for instance. What policies directly affected Black unemployment? What policies directly affected Black poverty? What policies affected Black women who need childcare going off of welfare? Because those policies need to be highlighted because, as you've heard me say many times on this show, policies that affect the least of us affect everyone. No one suffers when poor people can eat. No one suffers when poor people can make their rent. No one suffers when poor people have the ability to navigate their lives with a little bit of luxury and a little bit of grace. No rich person got broke from poor people getting a little bit of help. So the questions that we need to ask and answer historically are, which policies have done that for the least of us? Because it's real easy to track the stock market. It's real easy to track the S&P 500 or the Dow, but it's not so easy to find out what happens in Appalachia, what happens in Watts, in Harlem, in Southside Chicago. How are those policies really affecting the bottom line for people in those communities? Because if we had a indicator as strong as the one for the S&P 500, you would see that those policies really have an effect on the bottom lines of people who need that help, but at the same time are giving a boost to everyone above them.
Leo, your thoughts, and then we're going to move off this economy.
So Montoya, I mean, when this thing is kind of simple and formulaic. I mean, I just said it. There are people who are concerned about the markets, business growth, business opportunity. There are people who are concerned about getting a job from that market. The reason why the gap in understanding what's really happening, as you presented it, Montoya, with your chart, is because the people who communicate the reality of the economy are the people who hold the pen. The best influencers are the business owners themselves. So the business owner, no matter who's president, is going to speak about the economy to his or her employees, telling them, you need to believe this way because that's how I'm writing you checks. And the business owner leans Republican.
That makes sense.
And that's why you see that different style. So when Bernie Marcus owns the Atlanta Hawks and part owner of Home Depot, and then he creates a business, a 501c3 and a 501c4 called Job Creators Network. Okay. He is focusing on, hey, you regular worker people, I'm a job creator. And if you want your job, you better do politics my way. You better listen to. So he's created a whole lunch and learn series. He puts it in their paychecks. Here's how jobs get created. My wealth creates jobs for you. Give me more wealth. So that's why that gap exists. I just want to explain. The wealthy, long-term business, pro-business people like Kofi, these people create the jobs. They don't create government jobs. They create private sector jobs.
I will challenge Leo on one aspect of that. I would say that demand creates jobs, and the people who can fill that demand are business owners. And where does demand come from? But people who have.
Well, I agree with you. That's why we need a balanced approach. I agree.
That's the part that I really want us to be able to articulate. And when it comes to balance, the best economies have tended toward a mixed leadership in Washington, D.C. It's been a Republican president with Democratic House and Senate, or vice versa, Democrat with Republicans in House and Senate. Those have typically been. Under Clinton, you had a Republican Congress that really did offset a lot of the extreme tendencies toward one way, and the president did the same thing when Congress was doing it. Congress has the power of the purse, but the president has the power of the veto. And so when those two find a creative and healthy creative tension, you see the economy really, really flourish. And that was the same under Obama. Although the Republicans really tried to sort of blunt everything he was trying to do, there was a stasis that ended up being really good for the economy. So you can find that in that mix versus an all Democrat or all Republican leadership team, you'll see that the economy really flourishes when people from both sides find common ground. And that's what Leo's talking about, because that's when our nation really does well.
And that's what y'all have always talked about since we started this show, especially since we brought Leo on, was having that healthy balance. That I remember Leo highlighted, I want a viable, even though I'm conservative, I want a viable Democratic Party because it's the best for our republic. So I remember you highlighting that yourself. And I always recall, and I still say this, I know people are, we kind of prisoners of the moment, if you will. But I always highlight, because I remember learning this, that George Bush Jr. gets into the presidency, has an opposing, obviously he had a little period with the same people, but eventually has an opposing House and Congress, never vetoed anything. I'm like, how do you be the president and never veto anything? Like, he literally never vetoed anything. And so for me, he was the worst president ever based on me looking at the numbers the way that I know how to look at them. Again, y'all can go more in depth than me, but I'm sitting here going, it was no way he could. He gave them, he gave us the checks that people like if you're on the low end of things or whatever, but there was never a veto of nothing. And I'm like, there's no balancing act, which kind of highlights what you talked about, Leo. We got to have the balance in the actually what happens inside of our democratic republic. Even though people want to be so extreme, you're going to lose out either way. So great conversation, y'all. Brother Pianki says, I love this economy. I'm not concerned with the social rift, point blank. Business controls politics. Vote who you will. Business dollars will buy them from under your feet. He's absolutely right. There's no arguing with actually what he's saying. It's so true, though. Here's the thing. It's so true that if you think about Shelley being so upset about the big beautiful bill, because he said all my Republicans ran that they were going to decrease the deficit. That's what you ran on, and it actually did the opposite of that, right? And so I would say that what Brother Pianki is talking about is still that reality, that the business people still bought it from under our feet, because Shelley's very mad about them not cutting down the deficit based on all of the
because Shelley kind of like talked Shelley Winter show. He kind of talks a lot about, he talks about it from sort of like the libertarian talking point on the economy, right? Okay. Reduce the deficit. The libertarian is never happy, right? Because both sides increase the deficit.
Right.
They just do that. And they just have different perspectives. Republicans increase the deficit and say, we'll create a market that'll overcome it, right? Democrats decrease the deficit and says, we'll just print more money, and that's how we'll take care of it. It's just different, like you said, demand side, supply side, it's just different perspectives on the whole thing. I mean, we see it playing out in Georgia in the work that I'm working on right now in data centers. Some folks are saying, well, look, we've got a deficit. This is Republican talking, right? We've got a deficit. We have high property taxes in the city of Atlanta. Well, here's a relief. You bring in these data centers, they push in by creating that market invitation to our market. They're pushing in billions of dollars. Now we're going to lower your property taxes. Well, guess who's that's meaningful for? People who own $2 million houses. So now you understand why this data center thing is moving along, even though it might raise your power bill. Because the attraction for the wealthy people who own the pen, who hold the mic, is that, whoa, Blake Tillery and all these guys running for governor and lieutenant governor, they're now saying 0 property taxes for Georgia, bring in the data center so we can offset it. We got to start looking at things in a more local way. And I think one of the things that I enjoy about your show and Emilio's brilliance and his homework is that we can break these things so that folks can see cause and effect and know what's happening around them. So thank you, Montoya.
You know, Leo, real quick on the data center.
We losing time. We're losing time.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Yeah, sorry about that.
We'll have a data center episode. How about that?
It sounds good. Right. That's the goal here. Raise the consciousness. If you're watching our show, hopefully you learn a little more than what the mainstream media is going to show you, who's trying to lean you one way. We're literally walking through it and talking through it as best as possible, as honest as possible. And we also have our personal leanings as well. So no running from that, but we are making an effort to raise the consciousness and help you understand how to see through the propaganda, if you will. But this next cut gets into the SAVE Act, which we got to talk about that. Right?
If you care about your right to vote, you need to know about the SAVE Act. A new version just passed the House, making a bad bill even worse.
That's what the bill does. Proof of citizenship and photo ID to vote.
It could disenfranchise millions of Americans and severely limit how you could register to vote and cast a ballot. How? 146 million American citizens don't have a passport. 21 million American citizens don't have easy access to a birth certificate or naturalization papers. 69 million women do not have a birth certificate that matches their married name. And the bill goes further than simply requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote. The bill would also require a strict form of photo ID to cast a ballot for the first time in federal elections. Nearly 21 million Americans also don't have a current driver's license, and only certain kinds of IDs would count. Student IDs wouldn't. Most tribal IDs wouldn't either. This would disproportionately impact young voters and voters of color. It also requires states to hand over their voter rolls to the federal government. This means your sensitive personal information could now be in the hands of Kristi Noem. The bill would also require that voters show their papers in person at an elections office. This would effectively end online registration, mail registration, and voter registration drives. And not just for new registrants, but every time someone updates their registration. Roughly 80 million people register or re-register every election cycle, and only 6% registered at an elections office. Although the bill is promoted by Republicans, it could most harm right-leaning constituencies. A study of the 30 largest counties in the U.S. by area found that voters would be forced to travel 4.5 hours round trip to reach their elections office. Some voters might have to travel as far as 8 hours to register to vote. This means that rural, oftentimes conservative voters could have to travel across 2 states and pay as much as $75 in gas money to show their documentation to an election official. And what are we safeguarding our elections from in the first place? 20. The number of suspected non-citizens found in an audit of Georgia voter rolls out of 8.2 million registered voters. 9. The number of suspected non-citizens found in an audit of North Carolina voter rolls out of 7.7 million registered voters. 30. The number of suspected non-citizens found in a survey of 42 jurisdictions totaling 23 million people, including 8 of the 10 areas with the highest populations of non-citizens. That represents 0.0001% of total votes. SAVE would complicate voting for millions of Americans, Democrats and Republicans alike, based on a virtually non-existent problem. Voting rights advocates describe it as quite possibly the worst voter suppression bill ever seriously considered by Congress.
Leo, we'll let you respond first. I realized I wasn't on the thing. All right, what's you holding up there?
Speaks for itself as a birth certificate. U.S. Air. Took 3 days to get. Didn't have to travel all these miles that he's talking about. That's BS. There's an overreaction to this. Yes, it's going to end up leading to fewer people voting. What's driving the SAVE Act is absolutely a guy who wants he wants to engender distrust based on the fact that he didn't win. This is a one man who is complaining like a whiny baby who didn't win the basketball game, so he's saying the basketball game was rigged. And the stats that he presents on, here's the frequency of illegal people voting, those are real. But to the Trump folks and to some folks who distrust government, they think 20 is too much. 9 is too much. How did that happen that somebody went into an elections office and actually voted without being a legal voter? All right. So what the difference here is, is that do we want a system that we can trust? This is how I'm taking it, Emil. Do we want a system that we can 100% trust because we know that it's actually harder to cheat with legal documentation? It's harder to cheat. Or do we want a system that's full of voters, even some that in voting in some ways that decrease trust? Now, notice what I said. I didn't say some voting illegally. I said voting in ways that decrease trust, right? Registering in ways that decrease trust. So right now, where trust is so low on voting, I'm okay with the SAVE Act because I think that with beyond a shadow of the doubt, once you get through a SAVE Act run election cycle, is going to be those numbers. You can't argue that there were illegals, voting in that. So I'm saying that increases trust. I'm okay with it.
Emil?
Not okay with it, and the reasons why we're in the video. But let me be unpack a little bit of the SAVE Act for people. It's not that people should not or cannot. Let me rephrase. People should be able to produce proof of citizenship. That's not a problem. The problem is that the way this is being handled is poor. For instance, many years ago, under the Carter administration, there was a push for a national ID. Republicans at the time hated the concept. They've resisted it through the Clinton administration and the Obama administrations. Republicans have hated the concept of a national ID, an ID that would immediately identify an individual as a citizen, because that ID would be what other countries issue upon some of their citizens' 18th birthdays. That has been resisted. The Real ID Act was resisted in implementation, which is why it took nearly 20 years after it was passed to be implemented, primarily by Republicans. So when you hear this conversation about safety in or security in our elections, there's literally no proof that those things have happened. There's just none. There's a lot of conjecture. There's a lot of speculation, but there's no actual proof. The last major study done was in 2014, and that study studied 1 billion cast votes and found, I think, 13 or 30, I can't remember the number, but it's either 13 or 30 instances of voter fraud and of intentional voter fraud. And of those, most were people who were just ignorant that they weren't citizens when they could vote. People who are like U.S. nationals who come out of some of the territories of the United States, not Puerto Rico, but other places around the world, where they're born as a U.S. national, they have a U.S. passport, but they're not considered citizens. These are the real anomalies in the voting process. So what does it take? In my opinion, what's not being discussed about the SAVE Act in the mass media is very simple. If you require people to have proof of citizenship, then in the language in the bill, you should have a pathway to get it. Republicans have tended toward, especially in states that have a traditional voter suppression history, they've tended toward making it harder for people to get the proof of citizenship. Leo was able to get it because he's a man of great means and wealth. He can just make a phone call or send a letter. But there are people who do not have his means, who do not have the access that he has to get that proof as easily as he did. Not saying it's not possible, saying it's harder. But if you put it in the language of the bill that requires, yes, we're going to mandate these IDs, and we're going to require that the states have a pathway to ensure every citizen can get their proof of citizenship from you, it makes a huge difference. What you see is Republicans specifically, but not exclusively, closing places that help. For instance, recently the Trump administration said we're going to not allow nonprofit libraries in compliance with a law that has existed for over 20 years, where both Republican and Democratic administrations have said it's okay. We're going to require that libraries that take passport applications be only government run. Many states do not have exclusively government run libraries. Libraries are a place for people who do not have means to go get access to government services. So that alone changes the tenor of how people get their proof of citizenship. When you do that, you're saying to the people in a message, yes, we want security in our elections, but not if it means giving you access to those elections. So there's a different way of.
Yeah, let me jump here and speed us up. Yeah,
let
me jump here and speed us up. Now, good points for both of you. Yeah, let me jump in and let me highlight the comments we're getting. Leo, that's your experience. I was born in Kentucky. I had to call Frankfurt and pay for my birth certificate to be sent to Georgia. It took several days. Then we got Brother Pianki saying, "You're right, Leo. The last voice is an idiot. ID is required to collect at the bingo hall, lottery office, and getting in the club." So
he's not an idiot. You just don't agree with him. But I thank you, brother, for that support.
So that's the dialogue. Here's it. Ultimately, we've talked about this again. This is politically conscious. So we've talked about the efforts that, if you will, both parties will make to suppress the vote if it's going to help them in their state. Like that is a reality. At the end of the day, suppressing the vote is, we wouldn't disagree. It's wrong by both parties. I'm not just making it a both party thing. I'm just highlighting that, as you said, it's taking his ball and saying, "Hey, I lost. Let me take. I brought the ball to the basketball game. Let me keep moving, Leo. Let me keep moving. I brought the basketball to the game. I lost. So I'm taking my ball and going home. And I'm going to highlight with this next cut, which highlights the real reason this is happening, in my opinion. And I want to see if y'all agree.
You're damn right. We're going to have ICE surround the polls come November. We're not going to sit here and allow you to steal the country again. And you can whine and cry and throw your toys out of the pram all you want, but we will never again allow an election to be stolen.
You know, it was the Republicans who agreed to this hearing. They agreed that this should be in public and on television. And it's possible they're only watching right-wing pro-Trump news, and so they haven't heard much about what Jack Smith actually did in his investigation. They may not know much about who he actually is and how he speaks. I don't know why Republicans agreed to do this today, but I'm guessing they did not expect that Jack Smith would just spell it out like this so clearly, spell it out. The evidence he found and the conclusions that he drew about the president's criminal behavior.
Did your investigation find that Donald Trump attempted to manufacture fraudulent slates of presidential electors in 7 states that he lost?
Yes.
Did he pressure state officials to ignore true vote counts in those states?
Yes.
Did he spread lies and conspiracies to his followers to make them believe that the election had been illegally rigged against him?
Yes.
Did he pressure DOJ officials to stop the certification of the election?
He did.
Did he pressure his own vice president, Mike Pence, to stop the certification against the oath of office that he had sworn to the Constitution?
He did.
And when all of this didn't work, did he, Donald Trump, motivate and inspire an angry mob to the U.S. Capitol to stop the certification?
Our proof showed that he caused what happened on January 6th, that it was foreseeable, and that he exploited that violence.
Did Donald Trump know that his allegations of election fraud were lies when he spread them?
Our proof was that he did, and we intended to prove that at trial.
Mr. Smith, if your case had gone to trial, would the evidence from Georgia have helped prove that President Trump knowingly engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the 2020 election?
Yes. After an investigation following the facts and the law, we believed we had proof beyond a reasonable doubt to prove those charges. Rather than accept his defeat in the 2020 election, President Trump engaged in a criminal scheme to overturn the results and prevent the lawful transfer of power. Our investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in criminal activity. We followed the facts and we followed the law. Where that led us was to an indictment of an unprecedented criminal scheme to block the peaceful transfer of power. But you are correct that the only person charged in this case was Donald Trump, who, in my estimation, was the person most culpable for the crimes charged.
So I'm gonna lean on you guys before I make assumptions. Any propaganda in what you just saw?
No,
I don't think so. I think that was pretty straightforward in his presentation. And that's why I said earlier that a lot of the buzz and the social media buzz and the news buzz about what's happening related to the SAVE Act is really sort of emotionally attached, not to the SAVE Act, is attached to Donald Trump, who is the whiny baby crying about something that already happened and then acting in a disassociated way from the reality on the ground. So again, I think if Donald Trump didn't exist with this complaint and this grievance, then people would look at the SAVE Act actually differently, I think. I think they might not
be a SAVE Act, Leo. I don't think
the SAVE Act, the language for the SAVE Act existed pre-Trump. There was efforts to get that done before Trump even came on into the scene.
Emil, any thoughts?
Yeah. So all of Jack Smith's testimony was compelling if you were to watch it all, because he laid out a very factual case, and the things that the administration pushed back on were not about the facts. They were about the demeanor, or they called them crazy. There's a bunch of things they did to distract you from the fact that he produced a very logical, very cogent argument about what happened in 2020. And the problem is that we are suffering as a nation from a delusion that there are people who are not authorized to vote in elections en masse. I'm not saying one at a time. Every state has its problems, and they know their problems, and they're working on their problems. There's no state that isn't working on its problems in voting. But as enough of a problem to be systematically making the election what he says it was is all wrong. And Jack Smith proved that with his facts. And when he testified in front of Congress, he really laid out something that people should have been paying attention to, because it squashes a lot of what you've been hearing in the popular media.
So let me jump in here for the sake of time, that this is the existential threat to democracy, in my opinion, that idea of highlighting that our elections, out of all of the elections around the world, as being somehow fraudulent, that we're even considering it when you got, as you said, Emil, 30 examples out of 1 billion. Like this is not a common sense conversation. So as a people, we have mud on our face that we allow the person who created the idea. And Leo, I respect you saying, hey, if it gives us more trust, and I'm not saying that it won't. So thank you for letting me know that this SAVE Act stuff was around, because I was attributing it to what just happened on January 6th. That's why I brought the cut. So I appreciate you. I love always getting corrected on the information. The language has been around. People has pushed for it. But here's people pushing for it. It's to lower the number of constituents that vote. I don't care which side pushes for it. And we know that that's the reality of what those in power have always done. So we, the people, in my opinion, should never stand for it. And now we're at the risk of the existential threat of our democracy, because we have mud on our face by putting someone who offered that our elections are a fraud, and we have enough people believing it that we're here, and that puts us in danger. And I think we as the people should realize that and get away from party politics when we're honest about the vote itself being what it is and what power we do have up against, as Brother Bianchi on here says, hey, they're going to buy the vote from under you. The only chance we got is to make sure more of us can vote and balance that out. That's my thoughts on how dangerous this, I'm not talking about the SAVE Act itself. I'm talking about us owning as a republic. We put the person back in office who actually didn't give transfer of power in a peaceful way, all based off lies.
You know, there's something that history can kind of help us with here. About 20 years ago, President Carter and Secretary Baker, Democratic President Carter and a Republican Secretary of State, Baker, James Baker, they formed a commission on what's called the Commission on Federal Election Reform. One of their strongest recommendations 20 years ago was that there needs to be a national voter ID and that every state should provide one to its citizens free of charge. Now, here we are 20 years later having this conversation when, to Leo's point, the SAVE Act language has been introduced in Congress before, well before it was introduced and passed in the House. But it's also something that has been lingering in our republic for decades. We have proof that there is a way to solve this problem. Neither party has been strong enough in its conviction to pass it. It was simple. The commission gave 87 recommendations in 2005. And if you go look at those recommendations, the exact thing they're talking about is what they're talking about today. And it's not.
Let me jump in for sake of time real quick and say, how do we as the people ask our constituents to do that? Because that's where the miss is. We're leaving it to them, who neither side will ever want to open up the vote because it doesn't give them power in their area. So it sounds like this commission that did what you said, Emil, Leo, what does grassroots looks like so that we ask to do this simple solution that I would never right now leave in the hands of either side on the politics of actually passing it, because the last 20 years just proved that they're not going to. So what do we as the people, how do we say, hey, let's get rid of this with this simple solution that was offered 20 years ago? How do we even do that, Leo?
I mean, first, you got to search your legal aid offices in town. I 100%, prior to Trump, there was a push in Georgia to require ID, right, at every precinct and poll. And I actually got out there, worked with the Carter Center, and tried to create a Democrat-leaning, because they were the ones complaining, organizations that would help people get free IDs. So, again, you pointed out well that even there have been Democrat partnerships with Republicans to say we need a voter ID, a national voter ID, as Emil pointed out. So this really isn't a partisan issue unless the party in control makes it a partisan issue. Americans on whole believe that we should have a trusted, verifiable ID for voting. They really do. So it's up to us as Americans to not be manipulated, in my mind, Emil and Montoya. The emotional manipulation that, it's too hard to get. Even the brother who talked about, well, Leo, that's your experience. I got mine in a couple of days. So what's wrong with getting a birth certificate in a couple of days? Why are you complaining that you are actually able to get your birth certificate? So are we saying that Americans are lazy? I mean, is that what we're saying? And so there's an argument. If you're too lazy to go get an ID, if you're too lazy to go get your birth certificate, do you even deserve to vote?
No, that's not what people are saying, Leo. That's not what people are saying.
Okay, so all I'm saying is let's figure out ways where there's dignity, whether I'm going to give people some real stuff.
Ask that question and not let me respond. And the reason I'm jumping in is because that's a political narrative that people are too lazy or too stupid. I played a clip last week where somebody was saying that on Abby.
And then therefore should they be able to vote?
So here it is.
Okay. Emil, I went there.
So that's fine if you think that. Then that's what you're saying. But that's not what's being said. What's being said is the reality of increasing votership. We already have a third of people who never go vote anyway, right? Which is to the advantage of those in power. But if we're going to say we the people want more people to vote, the reality of you're saying, but
not everybody agrees with that statement.
Not everybody agrees.
Not everybody. I may think the more people, the more better. But there's an actual very strong argument that was even presented by Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, that America tends to have a governor that is nihilistic, and that nihilistic governor is that issue, that the American form of government where one person, one vote exists, means that America will find itself at the lowest common denominator. So whatever the intelligence level, the amount of engagement, that the lowest common denominator of voter in America is, right, that's as high as America can
Yeah,
get.
we play that with
That's so some people say we don't want that kind of democracy.
Leo, you just misheard me though. I said the people. What I mean is you're talking about the people that wanted to suppress the vote. They absolutely believe that, and here it is.
Qualify the voter.
Yeah, here it is. Here it is. So
call it what you want.
So I wasn't saying all of America wants this. I wasn't saying that. I was highlighting that the people to have a shot against those who can pay for their vote, who actually put money into politics, who are going to have more influence. I'm not disagreeing with that reality, but if we're going to also tell people watching that you have power even in that system, and it does come out to numbers, then the only way the people could have that is have an increase of numbers. So it's not that we're saying that somebody's stupid or like this, but I will say when we push politics the way we push it and people get dissatisfied, yeah, people will mentally be like, oh, it's time. Just like a lot of times people don't even pay attention. Like, oh, if it's not a big general election, people don't, oh, damn, the votes today. I need to run over here today and go vote. I've done that myself, and I vote in every election.
This is one of the reasons why, Montoya, that I miss the New Georgia Project. I didn't agree with them. I don't like their politics. I don't like how the New Georgia Project, which was a voter registration organization, huge, right? Millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars actually went through that organization. And Stacey Abrams rode that to an increase in her viability. But the end result was that the court's opinion was that Stacey was using it as a campaign office more than she was a voter registration. I want to focus on the voter registration piece because I ran a program called Secure the Vote, and I went around Georgia educating people on how to vote. So I believe in giving people access to the vote, but educating them along the way. We don't have in Georgia, we don't have a very strong voter education modality right now. We need it. Okay. But in other states, even you can go online, folks. If you know people, if you want to encourage a process that will increase access to the vote, look up voteriders.org and idignity.org. Other than that, what's the women's organization, Emil, that always women's voters organization, go to them. And what I want to encourage folks, what's that?
Was it the National Organization for Women now?
No, not that one. There's another, I think it's AVW or something like that. But it's another voter organization that does registrations. They tend to do it in middle-class communities, so therefore Black people don't know about it as well. But they are a trusted, nonpartisan organization that does voter registration. Look, that's real. I mean, I've been at the Carter Center with the people that you talked about who formed the commission and that kind of stuff. And look, dude, there are people who claim to be voter registration organizations, but they only register one party.
Let me jump in. Leo, let me jump in.
Go ahead.
I know you're trying to give out information, and I'm not just trying to devoid of that. But I still don't think that because you care about increasing voter registration, that it's not realistic to the fact that sometimes you just realize, oh, we can go vote now. That is realistic. It's realistic that as people become apathetic, they're going to take less step if I have to go do that just to go vote when they've been able
and
to.
I want to make it plain. I want to make it plain, Montoya, that there are some thinkers, leaders, policymakers who think it's okay if that person doesn't vote.
But I'm not. But here it is. I don't know why you think don't understand that. I've always understood that when from the beginning of our Constitution, when it says landowners could vote, it's just a select few of the landowners that they wanted to vote.
And what I'm saying is there's a good argument for that. There's a good argument for it.
Yeah. I'm not disagreeing with that. Like, matter of fact, you go to talk philosophy. Socrates feels that way. Like everybody shouldn't be able to vote. I go by Black Socrates. You go look up his history of talking about the vote. The voter should be intelligent and informed. That's what he believes about a republic. I'm just talking about. So I'm very aware of that thought process. I'm not even necessarily saying that it's wrong. Let me say that personally. However, based on for my personal opinion, let me put personal opinion, because we have Citizens United in the place, then I'm not with it while that's in place. You get rid of Citizens United, then I'll listen to your argument because I do see there's valid thought process in that. But while you got Citizens United where more money could get poured in, that's why I feel like we're experiencing what we're experiencing now. Fewer people controlling the purse actually are able to control our government because we've written into law a way for them to do that. So the only chance I have, if I can't spend $1,000 or $10,000 for somebody's plate to help them in their thing, if I can't do that, well, my one vote means less than we're just being honest that my one vote means less in the current situation. So I'm not saying that the argument itself stands up or against what you're talking about. I respect that. But however, currently, I think we need more people voting. So that's just my soapbox on that. I do want to make sure we pay a tribute to Jesse Jackson. So if y'all will, we're going to watch what Shelly has to say. If I can keep y'all from, do y'all both have 10 more minutes? Because I want to give him his proper due. We got to do that. That's the only way, right? If we're going to be the Political Country Show, we got to play proper due to Jesse Jackson. But this is Shelly talking about it on his show, and I'll just get y'all responses and we'll close the show.
Volunteer. And I remember saying back then, that America's never going to hire an African American for president or a minister. That was my thought back then. I was young. And I wasn't really interested in politics. And quite honestly, none of the women that were asking me to volunteer were necessarily, the fine women. So I declined. But I was young and stupid. And he rallied the country. He built the grassroots organization that Bernie used, that Barack used, that many other outside the mainstream party apparatus used. Trump used it in many ways. This outside of the party apparatus. That's what Jesse Jackson did for politics in this country. And then I went through a period of time when I became, when I got out of school and started working in corporate America. I worked at Ebony Magazine, and he helped me. Mr. Jackson helped me several times. He helped me get clients from corporations by writing letters saying, hey, African Americans are buying your product. Why aren't you advertising? And he would write these letters not for me personally, but for John Johnson, who was the publisher and founder of Ebony Magazine. And many of those clients became mine at a certain time. Those agencies that I worked with in those early days started meeting with me. I would call them over and over and over and over again and try and get meetings with these agencies. And they would usually tell me, we don't need Ebony Magazine. We can get African Americans in People and Sports Illustrated. Mr. Jackson would help Mr. Johnson. They worked together to put pressure on these corporations to advertise to the very people who should be buying your products. And that helped me in my early days in advertising sales. Skip ahead to the corporate. And now, about this time, I started to think this was wrong, to put pressure on a McDonald's or a Ford Corp or Ford Motor Company or Toyota Motor Company or Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola. I thought it was wrong to basically extort these companies into hiring and training and getting ownership, but providing ownership opportunities in the supply chain to African Americans. It's like, this is not right. And I went through that period that all of us go through in your mid-20s where you think the old-timers don't know what they're doing. Oh, these old preachers, they don't know how to get freedom. If I was, you become more Malcolm X than Jesse Jackson. You become more Marcus Garvey than Martin Luther King. And you get mad and you call them names. You said, they don't know what they're doing. They're only enriching a few. But then with age comes wisdom. And if you're like me, you realize, whoa, Jesse had to do what he had to do. Many people complained about it. Many people said it was wrong, but he had to do what he had to do because these corporations weren't going to make the changes on their own. Steve Ewing up at Cobb Parkway, Ewing Ford, the Ford dealership up there, he got into the into the dealer manufacturer's training with Ford because of a Jesse Jackson. Earl Graves with Pepsi. The family, family that owned WBLS in New York. All of these families, all across the country. Carl Weir here at Coca-Cola. I can name the names. I was there. I watched it happen. Jesse Jackson started that. And you can say what you want to say, but if you're dealing with a corporation in a country that's just going to take your money and never give you any ownership opportunities, you have to put pressure on them in the only way you can, by telling your people not to buy it. And that's what he did. I used to think it was wrong until with age came wisdom, and I realized that's the only way to happen. And here's the thing. Many people will say, well, Shelley, it's only one or two people. No, those one or two people started businesses that hired hundreds of people, and those hundreds of people had children that went to college on the basis of those businesses created at the pressure put on these corporations by Jesse Jackson. That is the legacy. That is the economic empowerment that he fostered. And that is how I would.
So, Leo, I'll let you start. That's Shelley's. He given some of his thoughts on his show. He gave more, but I just thought it was, for personally, I thought it was a proper legacy. People are out here kind of debating on, what Jesse really meant and that type of thing. Just at this point, I think we're gonna end this with some decorum and be respectful of, in a sense, what Jesse has added to the legacy of America. And I thought Shelley's cut really played proper due to that. But your thoughts as well, Leo.
Well, no doubt. I had much respect for the legacy and history of Jesse Jackson in his own entity as a political operator. I think that he learned much being in the background of the Martin Luther King movement. And, there's controversy about his relationship. It doesn't matter. What he did post Dr. King was good, helpful coalition building, reaching across from places of power, reaching across and making connection. My company is called Engage Futures. We used to have the tagline, Bridging America's Divides. That is inspired by the leadership from people like Jesse Jackson, who tried to be a bridge. They got access. They try to bring in other people from their access. Okay. And that's just very responsible leadership from that gentleman. That inspires us today. Soon we'll be announcing an event that we're going to do, right? And in that event, I'm going to share some ideas about how to be a leveraged voter, how not necessarily always a boycott, but there are ways in which we're inspired by someone like Jesse Jackson that's going to inspire this idea of the leveraged voter that you'll hear more about as Montoya shares with you this upcoming event. And he'll do that. So stay tuned to all of Montoya's feeds, all of his ways of connecting and communicating with you. Share with other people, because this is going to be an exciting thing on towards 2026 and 2028.
Yeah, we're 1 month
Jackson
away from
inspired.
Yeah, absolutely. Great thing to say. We're one month away from a 2-day live event here in Atlanta. Just giving y'all a slight heads up. Emil, I'll let you close us out again, playing proper due to the loss of an icon, Jesse Jackson. Had some other cuts I wanted to play, but thank y'all for the extra time. So if you will, close us out for today, and then I'll highlight just one tidbit of what we're doing for next month. And I'm gonna close out with a commercial for some of our viewers for something we're doing Sunday. So we got the live experience tomorrow, and we have a Sunday private Zoom on Sunday. But go ahead, Emil, close us out with your thoughts on Jesse Jackson.
I thank a man who in 1988 roused 7 million voters and won 11 primary elections in his run for president by saying 3 words that impact me every day. I am somebody. Rest in power.
Hey,
Amen.
There it is. And so, just so stay tuned. I'll be promoting on our IG page. Make sure you're subscribing to this page. The show's coming up to it. We're gonna lead up, but we're literally gonna do a 2-day event, a think tank one day, move into a grassroots conversation for those in Atlanta. Y'all know about the Mental Dialogue live experience every third Friday. And so basically we're gonna turn that event into a politically conscious event. And then we're doing a think tank high-end event the night before. Thanks to my brother Eldred. Shout out that brother. Great new location, man. So we're gonna have a free event, free parking, and and have maybe some little drinks on the side as well, as we have a think tank dialogue about how we all can be politically conscious and more politically active and influence politics. Like I said, Leo will be introducing some very specific ways of how we as the individual voter can actually have more power in this game. So if any of that sounds interesting, make sure you are subscribed and make sure you hit for the notifications, because anytime the show come on, then you'll get the promotions for that. So I'm gonna close out again for another promotion that I have on Sunday. So if you know anybody that needs this, make sure they contact us as well. We'll see y'all next week as we pop on for y'all next week. This is episode 62 of Politically Conscious. I'll holler at y'all next week. Let me find my closeout commercial and we're out of here.
What if the real problem with modern dating isn't a lack of love, but a loss of order? Welcome to Black Love Dialogue and Wine, a private podcast experience for those serious about love, marriage, and legacy. This isn't surface level romance. These are intentional conversations reclaiming the strongest love ever known, Black love. In today's dating culture, we've normalized trauma bonding and calling it commitment. We've romanticized love while forgetting marriage was built for legacy before feelings. At Black Love Dialogue, we restore balance, honoring love and structure, emotion and purpose. If you're seeking love, strengthening it, or preparing for marriage, this private experience gives you the mindset and resources to build lasting pair bonds. This private Zoom takes place 8 p.m. Eastern, last Sundays of the month. So get your tickets on eventbrite.com and bring your flash so we can toast and deep dive into legacy before love, featuring therapists Makaya Dominguez, Marilyn Odwini, mental health advocate Chris James, and award-winning relationship coaches Fala Antoine, Derek Cecile Clark, and Vaughn the Love Alchemist with over 35 years of marriage.